Good morning and welcome. I'm Emma Moore, Research Associate on the Military Veterans and Society Program at the Center for New American Security. CNAS is committed to bold, innovative, bipartisan research that drives national security policy forward. Thanks so much to all of you for joining us for this virtual panel, the third in our planned multi-part discussion series on race in the military. The first discussion focused on the lived experiences of people of color in the United States military, and the second focused on the perspectives of two first captains at West Point through their careers. Future sessions will cover the importance of understanding intersectional experiences and how to recruit the next generation of service members. Today, we are taking a deep dive into the Air Force's response to racism across the nation and in the ranks. The Air Force has had some of the most diverse senior leadership, including current Chief of Staff of the Air Force, General Charles Brown, and Chief Master Sergeant Joanne Bass. As a growing number of airmen have opened up about what they have experienced in service and had honest conversation with peers, leadership, and communities, Air Force leaders were some of the first to foster discussion, including two of our panelists today. We are proud to partner with our Adjunct Senior Fellow, Dr. Jason Dempsey, and Bishop Garrison of Human Rights First for this series of monthly discussions. I will now turn it over to our moderators, Jason and Bishop, to introduce our esteemed panelists.
Thanks, Emma. It's great to be here today for our third. And it's a special privilege for us two Army guys to take a deep dive with such a great and esteemed Air Force crowd. We have quite a generational span here today, and we're truly honored to have kind of the gamut of the last 30 years of the Air Force experience. First, I'd like to introduce Cadet Mark Johnson. Mark is a third-class cadet at the United States Air Force Academy, majoring in military and strategic studies and minoring in Japanese. Mark was born in Germany, but calls Indiana home. He attended Jeffersonville High School, where he's a multi-sport athlete in wrestling, track, and cross country. And his goal upon commissioning is to become an AC-130 pilot and fly for Air Force Special Operations Command. Mark, if you stick around today, we might be able to introduce you to some folks, I think. Our second guest is Major Alea Nadeem. Major Nadeem moved to Iraq from the US at the age of 8 and spent a good portion of her youth in Mosul under the regime of Saddam Hussein. She returned to the United States, and where she later enlisted in the Air Force and then graduated from Air Force ROTC at the University of New Mexico. She's currently working for Senator Lisa Murkowski as a legislative fellow. Our next guest is Lieutenant Col Myron Chivis. Myron's a California native and a graduate of St. Mary's College. He's a B-52 pilot who served as the military assistant to the Undersecretary of the Air Force, as well as in congressional affairs. He's now a student at the National War College. Last but not least, we have Lieutenant General Jim Slife. Lieutenant General Slife grew up in Hot Springs, Arkansas. He's a graduate of Auburn. He spent the last 31 years in the Air Force Special Operations Community and currently serves as the commander of Air Force Special Operations Command. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Lieutenant General Slife for some opening comments.
Well, thanks very much. I appreciate the opportunity to join CNAS today for this important discussion. And I'm honored to be on the panel with a team of fellow airmen whose experiences and ages run the gamut. You know, as you were talking about the gamut of experiences we have, I kind of felt like there was some ageism involved in that, and perhaps there was a little dig at me, but that's okay. I'll set that aside and be ready to engage today. Obviously, I've got a history with Colonel Chivis, and I'm sure we'll get into that and have the opportunity to talk about it a little bit. But we've got about a decade's worth of history on this topic that I think will be really interesting to talk about. I'm privileged to join Cadet Johnson, so I know one or two AC-130 pilots. Love to link up with you afterwards and help you on your path. And to Major Nadeem, thank you for joining us today. Somewhere out there in the United States Air Force, there's a Lieutenant Slife who also did an internship in Senator Murkowski's office. So you're in good company, I think. But I look forward to engaging in the discussion and having a frank exchange of ideas about this important topic. So thanks very much.
Yes, sir. So to start with you, right, we've got, and to put it in perspective for everybody, right, we've got everywhere from 31 years experience in the Air Force, 18 years experience in the Air Force, 12 years commissioned in the Air Force, all the way down to -2 years experience in the Air Force. And so, you know, while careers tend to be linear, right, start points are different. And so I'd like to start with you, General. If you could think back to when you commissioned, right, what were the conversations around race like in Auburn in 1989 and in the Air Force, right, as you first came in? And what have you seen in terms of how people talk about race between then and now?
So, you know, we're all products of our own upbringing and experiences. And so I didn't. My upbringing was the only one that I knew, and so I didn't realize that perhaps it was different than anybody else's. I just assumed that my life was typical. You know, I think that's probably the thing that many people assume when you start out. And so I grew up in Hot Springs, Arkansas. There were not there weren't any people of color in my high school in any respect. It was all a white school. When I went to school at Auburn, it was slightly more diverse than that, but the ROTC cohort was not. I don't recall any cadets of color. And so when I was commissioned, race to me was not a discussion, and it wasn't a discussion because I didn't want it to be a discussion or because I had a particular view on it. It was just something that I hadn't really been exposed to at all. And so it wasn't until I got to really my first operational squadron in the Air Force where I actually served with anybody that had a different racial background than I did, and really in that first squadron that I was in, there was really only 1 or 2 African American airmen in the squadron, and so it wasn't a wildly diverse demographic, but that was really the first time that I'd been exposed to it, and what I remember about that was that it was a total non-topic. We didn't talk about it. We didn't acknowledge it. And I think the, company grade officer version of Jim Slife probably incorrectly assumed that the reason we didn't talk about it was because we were in a post-racial Air Force. And I just assumed that we didn't talk about it because everybody was evaluated against the same standard and everybody served, on the same basic footing, and everybody was treated the same way. And that was just the assumption that I had. And it wasn't until significantly later in my career that I perhaps had the opportunity to revisit some of those early on assumptions that I had about kind of the nature of race in the Air Force. So I would tell you, to directly answer your question, what were the conversations like at Auburn University in 1989? There weren't any. And I just assumed that that's just the way it was everywhere.
Thanks, sir. Those are, the idea of the assumption of post-racial is something we've heard in a lot of discussions. I would welcome either Myron or Alea to jump in to flesh out kind of the middle in terms of different experiences. But for now, I'd like to jump first, though, to Mark. Mark, you're at an Air Force Academy which used to, much like Auburn and other commissioning institutions, used to be a majority white male institution. But now we're in a period where now the Air Force Academy itself is a majority minority school. White males are no longer the dominant population. Could you tell us a little bit about what are the conversations like today at the Air Force Academy as they relate to race?
Yeah, so I haven't really experienced the Air Force Academy when it was a majority white institution, but yeah, of course I can speak to how it is now. The conversations are difficult. of course, right? You have people who come from all sorts of different backgrounds. As Lieutenant General Slife mentioned, there are people who went to high school and they didn't have any African Americans that went to school with them. And then you have people not only from all around the country, but all around the world even. So we have foreign cadets, right? And especially recently, the conversations have been hard, right? So we sit down and we have these conversations, and towards the end, I remember that we have to give one word to describe the conversation, and words that came up were like difficult or awkward even, or forced, right? But another word was important. And I think that it's a really cool opportunity to see like this melting pot of people come together, and to be able to like have this awkward conversation at first, but as the conversation goes on, people get more comfortable and things like that, and the conversation starts to grow. And then after that sort of forced conversation is over, you start to see people have these more interpersonal important conversations together. So it's not forced. And I think a really cool thing is that USAFA encourages that. You know, the leadership here talks about how we have an unlimited amount of resources to go to if we want to talk about these kinds of things, if you're not maybe comfortable with talking about it with people in your cadet squadron. Or you know, it's so cool. I really enjoy it because it's the environment here is that you should be able to express where you come from, right? You shouldn't hide who you are, right? If anything, you should embrace it and share that with people. And as I said, it's a really cool experience that I've had so far, and that several of my other classmates have had.
Thank you for that. This is a fantastic framing to kind of get us to our field grades. So a question I want to kick the same question over to you folks, and Alea, I'd like to start with you, but I want to reframe it just slightly. So we're looking at what's taking place more broadly in society right now, and we're looking at a world that is now post Breonna Taylor, post George Floyd, and we're seeing the impacts that those situations have had, both from a societal standpoint and also politically. So have you seen any of kind of the permeable barrier of what happens in society? Have you seen it come across in your own life and work into the military side of things? If so, how do you think what's happening in society right now may be potentially impacting the units that you've been a part of, or even your work on the Hill? Because you're in a very unique position, I think, right now to really have witness history play out in three different aspects, both your personal life, your military life, and politically with work on the Hill. So can you just give us your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I know personally, I grew up in Ohio, and then, Mosul, Iraq for a portion of my life. But when I came back to the US, this is, I was in high school when 9/11 happened. And it was a school that was predominantly mixed. So there was, there was sort of all ethnicities represented. But the day that 9/11 happened was the first time in my life where a light was sort of shined on me that I was Middle Eastern. It was the first day that I sort of noticed that I was different. And that really happened because somebody had called me a terrorist. And I think the whole country was really confused between what a Middle Eastern person is, what a Muslim was, what an Arab, like it was all just kind of, jumbled together. And so they just saw you as one. It was the first time I'd been asked if I was a Muslim, even though I went to a Catholic high school, right? So that was the first time for me of feeling, whoa, what is this? And so, but that negative experience is actually what drove me to serve the military. And I worked as a bagger at a grocery store, and there was a guy there, and he worked for the Air Force. He was one of the guardsmen. And I was complaining to him that, high school students had called me a terrorist. And he said, you should join the Air Force. I think they could, we're in these wars now. We could use your skills. Do you speak Arabic? And I said, yeah. And he goes, why don't you join the Air Force? And I said, why would I do that? And he took me to the recruiter, and the recruiter was a female. And I remember that was a key point for me, because I was so scared. I thought, how can I join the Air Force, right? I know nothing about the Air Force. And she was a Master Sergeant Jankowski. And she said, oh, of course you can join the Air Force. And so I enlisted in the Air Force 2 years later. And I joined security forces. And the reason I joined security forces is because I wanted to say, what deploys the most? I want to deploy because I want to get to Iraq. I want to educate people. I want them to know they're not terrorists. Little did I know I have to go through basic training and technical school and all this stuff. But that was my personal experience coming in to the military. And then so here I am, I get to the military, and I'm honestly just trying to be the best airman that I can be, right? I want to carry the same weight. I want to do the same things that my peers are doing. So I really wasn't thinking about race. I just wanted to be really good at what I did. And then I ended up commissioning. And so when I commissioned, in 2008, when I commissioned, race wasn't on my mind. I really wasn't thinking about it. I just wanted to be a really good intelligence officer. That's what I wanted to do. Probably not till mid-career did I start seeing, I call them sort of microaggressions. And I know sometimes people don't like that word, but it's really subtle things that happen to you over a time, and you can't exactly pinpoint it. But one thing I can pinpoint is when we talk about what happened to George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, we're seeing sort of, I think, the explosions of what happened in society. And there's been a buildup of what has happened. And I sort of see the same thing in the Air Force right now, is there's all these little things. It's a death by 1,000 paper cuts. And now we're presented of what can we do to change this. And so, the Air Force has responded. They stood up a task force on 9 July to kind of look at these sort of institutional barriers that can probably not address some of the racism that we see, but it's a good starting point. So from a professional standpoint, we have a lot more work to do, but we're starting the conversation. So those unfortunate things that happened in society, I think the silver lining is we're having this conversation right now to talk about it, so the next generation, so Cadet Johnson never has to experience some of the things that we've had to experience.
Thank you so much. Myron, similar question for you. I think you could provide some unique perspectives as an African-American man, as a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force. Can you just tell us a bit about, have you had to have some of these awkward conversations as Mark mentioned, and if so, just what have your experiences generally been like here recently?
Hey, first, I want to say thank you very much for the opportunity. This CNAS, I've read about it, I've heard about it, I understand how you guys started. This is amazing, and to share the stage with the four of you is outstanding. Big picture, race has always been something in my life, right? So just growing up in a diverse city and being bussed around town to go to different schools just because that's where you can get education. It was something that was a part of my core since I was a kid. Joining the military, there were things that were introduced to me that were just new in life, and previous conversation, we talked about shaving, like learning how to do that. So the differences or things that I had to learn were just to be a part of the organization. They're always up front. And then the conversations about, first it was other Black officers that were just like coaching me through it. Like, hey, try this, try that. You may see this. So there were a group of people, a family that reached out to me overtly just to help me through, because they they were aware that there are going to be some issues that I need to learn early. On a professional side of the military, the first overt action is when I went to pilot training. You know, so you have your dollar ride, which is your first ride. You know, the first 2 days I didn't get to go. And then I see my name up on the board against somebody that's not in the squadron. And then I find out that I didn't fly the first 2 days because I had to wait for this third guy. Well, this guy outside the squadron. And when he showed up, he was the only Black instructor, right? Captain Gary Gray, A-10 pilot, bless him. And so I had heard everyone had flown loops and done all these things. When he and I flew together, it was straight and level. And I'm like, hey, Captain, like, let's do a loop, let's do an aileron. He's like, nope, not you. I'm like, well, I really want to, I've never done that. He's like, you can't get sick. I said, well, why not? I mean, my buddies did loops, and I mean, you got the Barney chair. That's the chair they put you in to throw up to get used to flying if you have some problems. I was like, I'll just go do that. And he goes, Myron, that's not how it's going to work for you. And so that was my first ride in pilot training. And then every so often, because he was guest help, he would just fly with us. He would fly with me. He was my guest help, I guess. And he would go through my grade book, and there were certain words. I know this now. I didn't understand this then. That would key him into, hey, it's time to go fly with Myron. And so he'd show up and he'd fly with me, and he would do an assessment and he'd give me feedback, and he would put words in there, not to counter, but maybe to adjust the perspective. And then when I got out of that phase of flying, I felt comfortable approaching him because I wouldn't fly with him again. I'm like, hey, why'd you do that, man? I'm awesome. I don't need help. I can make this work. And he's like, I understand you think that, but I've seen how this plays out. And it goes into another experience that I had in that second phase of flying. But I look back and I can say, Captain Gary Gray saved me. He is someone that I can look back onto and say he stepped out there and helped me through this. And I look at, you know, the statistics now, because that's something that we can all kind of just agree on because they're numbers, and say I could have been a statistic. And then it goes into command, right? So as a commander, there's some broad authorities that you have for, you know, punishment. And when I was with my peers, it appeared to me that some of us valued things differently. I'm not saying they were wrong. I'm just saying I saw it different. And some of the airmen, the way I would respond to specific things was completely different than my peers would. And so when we saw the numbers, when the Air Force stepped up and said, hey, we've had some issues and discrepancies here, what the Air Force said is something that I had witnessed in life and then as a leader for some time. So that's a long answer to say it's always been at my core. It's something I haven't focused on it like Alea. I just want to be good at my job. But it's something that I've thought about from an early age.
It's an incredible story. Thank you so much. Jason?
No, thank you. That was, yeah. Thanks to all of you for, you know, fully engaging and showing us how we have these discussions. You know, Myron, you were talking, or as Myron was talking, right, one of the themes that comes up that we've seen in the Army, you know, the Navy, the Marine Corps, the repeated element that relates to career success is mentoring. And mentoring, you know, there's two different kinds of mentoring, right? There's a, you know, find somebody like you that, you know, Myron mentions, and that, you know, we heard powerfully from General Brooks during our last session. But, you know, when there aren't that many up above, you know, how do you navigate finding mentors or being a mentor? And so I'd specifically like to turn that question both to General Slife and to Alea. You know, what has your experiences been in figuring out how do you mentor somebody who comes from a different place? And for Alea, maybe if you lead first, you know, how do you navigate finding somebody that can help you navigate your own path when most folks don't look like you?
You know, I really love this question, Jason, because most of my mentors have been white males, just because that's mostly what's been afforded to me. But they've never, I mean, I wouldn't be here without them, right? And there's been women there too, but most of them who've really, you know, pulled me up, right? Not just mentored me, but pulled me up. And they've never once brought up, you know, anything about me being a female. It always was based on my work ethic and I think potential. And those have been very frank conversations, right? And I am so appreciative of those males who kind of looked out for me and took care of me, because there's also been at times where sometimes females, and this is part of the problem, is when you have a minority of females, sometimes you were the only female for a very long time. And if there was 2 females at the table, that was competition. And if there was 3, and it turned into, unfortunately, something negative because there were so few of us. So I've also experienced the other side of where I've wanted somebody, where I've looked at a female and I thought, oh my gosh, okay, great, you can help me. They want nothing to do with me. And not because I think they're not good people. It's just that they grew up in a generation where they just had to survive, right? So if you look at the females who are now probably, you know, RGOs, grew up in the 80s and the 90s, when they were cadets, they couldn't, you know, they had to fit in. You know, they could not ask for certain things. So I've experienced both, and I just say most of my mentors do not look like me, and I'm completely okay with that. I'm just truly grateful for the mentorship and support that I've received.
Yeah, and General Slife, you know, sir, you've been very forward-leaning about talking about these issues, you know, from an institutional perspective. What has been your experience, you know, on the mentoring issue? Have you changed over the course of your career how you've thought about how you reach out to junior officers and how you mentor folks through the various career paths?
I have, and you know, it's interesting that your last panel featured an unsurpassed personal mentor of mine, General Vince Brooks. I served as General Brooks' chief of staff in Korea for a while, and I've never had a more invested mentor than the time that I served with General Brooks. But you know, I think to a certain extent, I think you know, we were kindred spirits in the sense that both of us, I think, found a lot of satisfaction in investing in the people coming along after us. And so he invested in me, but I've certainly invested along the way in the past. And I would draw a distinction between, you used the word mentoring, and I would say that there's a difference between mentoring and grooming. And the way another mentor of mine explained it to me was that mentoring is for the many, and it's giving people the benefit of your experiences. And so, for example, I might have a commander's call with a room full of 100 officers, and we could do mentoring, right? And I could tell them about my experiences and things that made sense to me when I was a squadron commander, or best practices that I picked up along the way. And this mentoring, you know, is all about my experiences, and they can either learn from it or throw it away, and you know, it's up to them, right? But grooming is for the few, and it's giving people the benefit of their own experiences. And so a lot of times when you're grooming somebody, you know, you are putting them in position where they will learn from the job that they're moving into, right? And a lot of times those two things get conflated, mentoring and grooming. But I tend to view them very, very distinctly. And when I say that grooming is for the few, it's not because I want it to be for the few, but you know, Myron mentioned being a squadron commander in AFSOC. You know, not everybody gets to be a squadron commander. That is a grooming job in the Air Force, that if you're going to, you know, in our current system, generally speaking, if you're going to be successful at higher echelons of command, you have to be a successful squadron commander. but not everybody gets the opportunity to do that. And so in addition to, when Myron Chivis is put into command of a squadron of airmen, not only is he put in there to be a great squadron commander, but he's also being put in there to groom him for future leadership opportunities. And so I think that always has to be kind of part of as we think about how we develop the people that we serve with and how we identify talent and potential. I think, there is an investment in mentoring that we ought to broadly make, but we ought to pay very close attention to where those grooming opportunities go.
Thank you, General. And I think that's a fantastic point that I want to take an opportunity to point back to Mark, to Cadet Johnson for. So we've spoken a lot about not only the past and what a lot of the experiences of our senior leaders here have been regarding race, but we also spoke with you briefly about what you're currently going through. Can you speak to us just a little about what you're potentially excited for entering the Air Force as a young leader, in terms of the level of diversity that we've seen and the level of thought leadership and thoughtfulness around the issue of race and diversity that you're seeing from Air Force leaders right now?
Yeah, of course. So, yeah, I'm really excited to get out there and finally join like the active duty Air Force and you do something, But I think the thing I'm really excited for is to be able to bring those things that the Academy is teaching me right now and to like put those into practice, right? So as Lieutenant General Slife and Major Nadeem were talking about, right, there are these mentorship opportunities that the Academy actually provides us. So I'm a third class cadet. I'm a sophomore, right? So every sophomore has a freshman under them, right? And it's called a coachee. So I'm a coach right now, and I'm his mentor. And the Academy, it's a leadership laboratory, is what people like to call it, and it really is, because they show you all the different ways that you can interact, not just with your coachee, but with each other. But your coachee is sort of like your practice point, right? So I could be this laissez-faire, hands-off coach to my coachee, and I can't really help him improve. He can just go through the Academy and not really grow, and or I could be this transformational leader, someone that is more hands-on. I can help him out with anything he needs. He's I mean, we're different races, right? But that doesn't matter, because we're all going through the same Academy experience together. We're all going through the suck, right? So, and I experienced his suck a year ago when I was a freshman, right? So I can help him out a little bit. And it doesn't matter what race I am or where I come from, which is, like I said, it's super cool. So yeah, the Academy gives me all these opportunities to practice my leadership style. And I think what I'm super excited for is to be able to go out into the active duty Air Force. And hopefully I've found my leadership style by then, but I'm excited to get out there and see what I can do to help other people out.
Yeah, I'm far removed from my time as a yuck at West Point, a third class cadet. So you're giving me some fond memories there. I appreciate that.
We don't have any cool names over here. We're just dualies and firsters.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd call them cool. Yeah, so if we could go back a little bit to you, Myron, you mentioned in your own personal experience kind of an informal network kind of stepped in to help you out. Have you seen in assessing a path forward, right? We always get a lot of, hey, official briefings, this is how you're going to act, this is how you're going to do. But at least in my experience, those things never seem to stick. And it really requires cultural change. Looking back at your experience in pilot training school, and then what you're going through now, what you have been through, where do you see the balance changing? Is the Air Force culture to the point where we might not need to rely on kind of informal extra chain of command networks to make sure everybody gets a fair shake, or what next steps need to be taken to, to kind of fix the culture so you don't go, so the next pilot training student doesn't go through what you went through?
Yeah, and that's the $1 million question, right? And I'll just start off with Mark, because Mark has me motivated with his optimism and coolness of what's going on right now and what he's looking to do in the future. And so that's my answer, right? We need more Marks. We just need more highly motivated folks that have diverse experiences that want to help other people. I mean, Mark is the answer, and that sounds kind of like ridiculous or pull from somewhere else, but that's what it is. And there's a tipping point. There's a tipping point from Alea's personal vignette. You start to think about or worry about things when there's so few of you. So once we have representation at many different levels, some of the informal piece of it will never go away because relationships matter, but there's less reliance on that to get around some of the systematic issues that we have. So I think that's what we point to is just the tipping point of representation.
No, thank you for that. Yeah, I think we've seen a lot of that on gender issues, and it does relate a little bit to what Alea was saying. And so I really kind of framed the same question to you, Alea, but on the the intersection of race and gender. What have you seen in terms of that tipping point of going from isolation to competitiveness to actual, I guess, collaboration and an accepted voice? Where do you think the Air Force is, and where do you think it needs to go?
Thanks, Jason. You got me like all fired up now, because for me, I want to be so positive like Cadet Johnson, but I've just seen too many things where I'm just not so positive. But I sort of have given up on culture change, right? Because it's so hard. But what I have not given up on is policy change. Because if you change policy and you change laws, you can protect people. And so this is sort of what I've done through the Air Force Women's Initiative team, is if we say that, the Air Force has some systemic issues with race, okay, how do we actually tangibly get after those? And so I want to share a small example. And the reason I want to share this example is because Lieutenant General Slife had a part in it, but it's going to sound very small, and it doesn't matter, and it's going to be a little bit funny, but hair policy. Okay, so why does hair policy matter? Well, if you go back to the 1950s and 40s, when women were first joining the military, so think of, the Women's Auxiliary Corps, right? It was a huge debate within our nation if women should be allowed to be in the military, and Congress, had to weigh in, and it was approved. And so you're like, okay, so why did we have to put our hair up? How did we get here? Well, funny enough, at the time, they didn't want females in the military to wear their hair down because they could appear too sexy and steal some married wives' husbands. But they couldn't look like lesbians, so they had to look feminine. And if you look, I literally have the old documents from the 1940s and 50s of what the manual said. So this is where we got our hair policies, this is where we're at today. Have we looked at those policies? We have not. We've been living with sort of these policies. And then if you peel that back for the African-American community, and specifically women who have hair like mine, there's a lot of breakage. It's not inclusive of culture. And we've never relooked at that. And so a group out at Seymour Johnson, some airmen, brought this to me and said, do you know that our hair policies are not inclusive and it affects us? And I said, I mean, no, it bothers me, but I've never thought about bringing it forward. And so we up-channeled this all the way to General Holmes, who is the Air Combat Commander right before he retired. And General Holmes is a bald man. And so, you know, it was very interesting to present this to him. And he said, this is, yes, I absolutely support this, you know, and really because it was affecting folks operationally. So when females fly, they have to put their hair down in a braid because the helmet doesn't fit. So we weren't even meeting operational points. African-American women were losing hair. They were having traction alopecia where their hair was literally falling out from putting it in the same hairstyle. So we've just overlooked this. So General Holmes signed it. And then I had this idea, if I could get the two most operationally minded MAJCOMs to sign this, surely the Air Force is going to say yes. So I reached out to AFSOC, and AFSOC, no questions asked, was on board. So Lieutenant General Slife and his chief signed a memo. And then after that, we got 7 more MAJCOMs. I couldn't get all 9 MAJCOMs to agree, but I got 7 MAJCOMs to agree on hair policy. And this is it seems insignificant, but if we can get this through, this is a huge win for women, for ethnic females, for ops, for medical. And so it's a small win on being inclusive and addressing some of this sort of systemic racism that we've seen from the 1940s and 50s. So I am very much interested in changing policy and tangible results.
No, I guess that's fantastic anecdote, and you know, lesson for all of us. Bishop, do you have a?
Yeah, so kind of a related, maybe even parallel issue for you, General. As a commander of a special operations unit, a major one, just interested to see, as we talk about this tipping point, we talk about the issues of race. Have you seen specifically within your unit, as much as you can kind of speak to it, how any of what we're seeing in society or in the military at large right now, this moment that we find ourselves in, has it had an adverse effect on recruitment and retention efforts around a lot of your minority operators, or have you seen any type of issues generally within the culture that you're hoping to address in some of these coming times?
Yeah, so thanks for teeing that one up for me. So the short answer is no, we haven't seen an impact on our recruiting or retention, but that's probably an incomplete answer, because the real answer would be it's too soon to tell. You know, I think we're probably not at a point where we have enough data that we can you know draw some correlation between kind of the events of 2020, if you will, and what our long-term recruiting and retention is. But I will tell you from a commander's perspective, so the Air Force Special Operations Command is the smallest major command in the Air Force, and every airman is precious to us. You know, every airman is a greater percentage of AFSOC's total human capital than any place else in the Air Force. And you know, when we think about these issues that Alea, you know, was alluding to with respect to women's issues, or you know, there are parallel conversations that Myron Chivis and I have had with respect to African-American airmen and policies that affect them. You know, my perspective on this is that if this is an issue for the airmen that I lead, then it's my issue. And I think Alea is exactly right. We have to go back to the fundamental, why do we have this policy in the first place? And a lot of times what we find is that the circumstances or the environment around which the original policy was made have long since changed, but the policy hasn't kept up. And so this is why, you know, she mentioned kind of the quick support from AFSOC and ACC on the issue that she was working. It just makes total sense to go back and look at kind of the backgrounds of these policies, and if they don't make sense anymore, then let's fix them, you know, right now. So it doesn't have to be an issue that Lieutenant Mark Johnson will be dealing with here in a couple of years. So I applaud Alea's focus on policy, but I would encourage you, don't give up on culture. You know, you say you've quit trying to change the culture. What I would offer to you, Alea, is that I realize that I can't change the Air Force, but I can change my part of the Air Force. And it doesn't matter whether you're you know, a third-class cadet at the Air Force Academy or a MAJCOM commander. You can change the part of the Air Force that you touch. And so Mark Johnson may not be able to change Air Force policy, but he's changing what that coachee dually is experiencing. You know, there is some fourth-class cadet at the Air Force Academy whose experience is being changed because Mark Johnson has decided to change it. And that, I think, is what all of us have to do. And so, Alea, I would just encourage you, don't give up on culture. You can affect the culture around yourself. You may not be able to change the Air Force yet, but you can absolutely change your part of the Air Force. And I applaud you for doing it.
Well, just one really quick follow-up, General, because I think you're hitting the nail on the head, and that's a fantastic point. Are there any specific policies or just even command tips that you use within your unit, within Air Force Special Operations, in which to help ensure that your subordinate leaders do whatever they can to eradicate these types of issues within the culture?
So the one thing that we've been talking about is issues of standards. You know, we are a standards-based organization as a military, and you know that is the basis for good order and discipline, is a set of clearly understood and articulated standards. And so whether there's standards for dress and appearance, or grooming standards, or whether there's standards for performance, you know, Myron's talking about his experience at pilot training and you know what the standards were to be able to get through pilot training and so forth. The conversation we're having inside of the Air Force Special Operations Command is to go back and let's just, where we have a standard, let's make sure we understand what the mission connection is for that standard, right? So if you're going to require me to do, you know, 100 push-ups to meet the standard to be in this unit, I'm okay with that as long as you can show me what the connection between 100 push-ups and my unit mission is, and not 50 push-ups or 150, but what is it about 100 push-ups that says that this is the standard for this unit that I you know, intend to be a part of. If we have a grooming standard that says that hey, we can't have beards, okay, you know, I understand that that's the standard, but I go back to, why is that the standard? Is there a military necessity? Is there a mission related reason for that standard? Or is it based on a set of societal norms of what a professional airman should look like? And that somewhere along the way, we've determined that a beard is not a professional appearance. And if that's what it is, then I would just say we have to challenge ourselves to figure out, well, you know, whose definition of what a professional appearance looks like are we using here? And is there you know, is there a conversation we need to have about that? So I would just say that our conversation inside of AFSOC is all about standards.
Sir, I love those remarks. You know, from the Army experience, you know, it was a real eye opener. As you know, we said, hey, we're going to integrate Ranger School, and the question was, well, one, why do we have the standards? And two, a lot of times we hadn't even written the standards down. And so we found within the Army that, you know, a lot of it was just about what the previous generation of white guys and how they'd haze the next generation of white guys. And nobody ever actually said, well, what is it about the standard that makes you a better Ranger? So sincerely appreciate that framing. And I would tee it up, I guess, to Myron in terms of being at that level where you're balancing, as you know, where you've been as a squadron commander and above, you know, you're balancing kind of legal enforcement of the standards. How are you navigating all that in a time when we're starting to integrate more women. We're realizing that some of our appearance standards are not necessarily mission driven. In short, really can I ask you to reflect on what General Slife has at least laid out as a vision for AFSOC?
So I've known General Slife for a long time, and we talk about mentoring and grooming. I want to believe that he spent some time grooming me. And, so I watched that episode of General Brooks because of the fond words that General Slife had about him. And I lead that to say this: because of who he has made me the type of person that looks beyond many of the things that other people have focused on. So when we go to mentors, like Alea, most of mine have been white men. I have multiple women and Black mentors, but the majority of them have been white males. So when I was leading the organization, my squadron, I just focused on impact, right? Like I focused on, and I keep pointing to Mark, all the things that Mark was talking about, the folks that cared about others, that just had optimism and capability, and that was it. And we just focused on that as an organization, and then we just kept winning, right? Like excess leads to success, and then people wanted to be a part of that, and we critically looked at successes, and we didn't look at like anything else. And if it didn't impact the mission, and then it wasn't of concern. And so our culture, Alea, back to your comment there, ours changed 100%. Over an 18-month period. In the last 6 months, I just got to sit back and watch that wave run because we only focused on the things that mattered, and we come to find out that the things that mattered to us were the only things that mattered to our boss. So we just stopped doing everything else. So.
That's great. Everybody's trying to navigate their own, navigate a career path amidst the middle of a changing environment, and it's wonderful to hear how each of you have approached that differently. I'm not sure, Emma, do we have any questions from the audience? We are getting close on time. Before we wrap up, I want to make sure we're not missing anybody. Doesn't look, I think we've addressed most questions.
I have a couple about the Air Force Academy and the environment for discussing race, and whether or not, Mark, you've seen any formal programs that force those discussions, that make them hard, or kind of what the reaction has been therein.
Right. So as I mentioned before, we have these sometimes, or more recently, we have these mandatory conversations where we have to sit down and talk, right? And as I mentioned, they are awkward because they're mandatory. And but then, as I mentioned before, once people start to open up, it's great because people start to have a more informal conversation, open things up. So as to the resources that are available to us, our leadership absolutely stresses the point that we have an unlimited amount of resources to go to, like the Equal Opportunity Center, maybe, or like chaplains, the sort that we can talk to have some critical conversations. The Academy provides several opportunities to be able to express yourself and things like your culture. And if a situation does arise to where you don't think you can handle it at that like personal level, there's definitely someone that you can go to. But I'd just like to add something really quick to the talk about the change in culture and policy and things like that. I 100% agree that a change in policy is important. And I think a change in policy and a change in culture go hand in hand, right? Because I sort of caught the tail end of the Academy when I joined, that there was a lingering feeling of the culture that you just do things because that's the way we've been doing them here, right? And some of the training that was taking place before I came here didn't have a purpose to it, right? What was the point? Was it really advancing our leadership capabilities, making us better people, better airmen? Or was it just because that's what like Jason mentioned earlier, that's just what the generation of white people before us did to haze each other, right? So I think something that's really important is that our upper leadership, Major General Michelle Edmondson and Lieutenant General retired Jay Silveria and General Clark, they've been absolutely instrumental in changing not only the policy, but a huge emphasis on changing the culture, right? Because now we're shifting towards conducting training exercises and things like that that have a purpose, right? And cadets have an opportunity to stand back or take a step back and think, like, why am I doing this? Why am I making my 4-degree walk around the hallways at attention, greeting everyone with their name and their rank? It's because that's a skill that you need to develop, right? Like knowledge tests and things like that. The thing that I've been told is that those are important for like stand-ups during like pilot training and things like that. So I mean, ma'am, I'd like to try to renew your hope in changing culture, because I'm not optimistic for no reason, right? My leadership and my peers around me have shown me that this place is heading in the right direction. Like, we're really growing.
Well, I really appreciate your guys' mentorship today. So thank you, Cadet Johnson, and then General Slife and Lieutenant Chivis. I'm glad I was able to be real with you, and honestly, like it is motivating to hear all three of you say this. So I will do some journaling on this.
So no, and this is fantastic, and I think it's a good segue to kind of, as we have a little bit of time left, but we want to start. We want to make sure that each of you have enough time to answer this as fully as you would like. But so how do we meet this moment in history? Then we've talked a lot about the current culture. We've talked about what we would potentially want to see affected or changed so that we can have more positive outcomes in the future. How moving forward can we do that for the culture and do it through policy as well, through a policy that is going to be broad enough and lasting, that will really affect how we interact within our teams, with individuals, and how the Air Force is able to continue to maintain its very high standards and meet mission. Myron, let's start with you, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so first things first, I've never been that, alcoholics are to this class and they stand up and they say, my name is such and such and I'm an alcoholic, right? And you have to say that to start, address the fact that you have an issue and you can't fix it until you do. Well, it's the Air Force and we have a problem. And once we can say that, we can move on. And we've gotten to the point where we've addressed some of the systematic issues and at least, say, hey, look at the numbers. The other piece is relationships. Mark says, hey, that forced time together. Really, it's not forced difficult conversations. It's forced relationship building. It's forced to be around somebody and have a conversation. And then once we have those conversations, we start to trust one another, because relationships matter. And relationships matter more than anything else. Your record, anything, it's your relationships, Mark. And I hope you just take that with you forever as you're greeting people in the hallway. Greet people when you pin on those gold bars. Say hi, tell them who you are. And then just as you did with Alea, you can politely just disagree, right? This is my perspective, and we move on. And so a combination of all those things, I believe, will move us forward, in addition to the tipping point, right? So we have a lot of people that are comfortable with speaking to one another. We have people that respect one another. We have folks that are honest with one another, and they've had experiences with different types of people to where it no longer matters, and we can move on and focus on lethality, which is the main goal of the military. So, long answer to your question.
No, fantastic one. Alea, do you have any additional thoughts here?
Yeah, I think this is the time where we can be on the right side of history, right? It's a moment where everything has come together, and we can take bold steps to do it. We look at the policies we had in the 80s and 90s, and this is what's sort of gotten us into this mess today. So what can we do today to change that? And that's going to take, no kidding, bold leadership to make very different changes. And this doesn't just go for race, but it just goes how the military is going to fight our next fight, how we're going to be operational. We have to take those bold steps. And if we don't have our house in order first with these type of issues, I don't know how we're going to be successful against our enemies.
Fantastic. Mark, I know you're a young cadet continuing through your education on a lot of these different issues, but would love to hear your perspective. How do you think we can rise up to meet this moment?
I think that it's certainly important to identify the problems that we might have in ourselves, like Lieutenant Colonel Chivis mentioned, like being able to say, hey, I have a problem, right? But I think it's also important to be able to have a little bit of courage, to be able to respectfully call out some people whenever they're maybe stepping over the line, right? And not doing those things that are going to be on the right side of history. Yeah, I just think that's important, is holding each other accountable and fostering, like the Academy says, a place of dignity and respect. That's what we should focus on. Everyone should feel that they don't have to hide anything about themselves. They're able to express who they are in a professional manner, right? And hopefully we can focus on lethality, right? Because that's the main goal.
Fantastic. I think you're getting a lot of head nods out there. So if we could give you a grade, I think you get an A today for what you've been doing out here. General, we want to close the question out with you, since you're in the thick of this as one of the Air Force's senior leaders right now. What are your perspectives? How can the military at large, but also more specifically here, the Air Force, continue to attempt to meet this moment?
So I think Mark and Alea have both put their finger precisely on it. So speaking as the what we'll charitably describe as the middle-aged white guy here in this group, don't assume that people like me have any idea what the issues are, right? I mean, whether it was Myron Chivis explaining to me that there's this thing called pseudofolliculitis parvae and what the impact of shaving is on many African-American men. I didn't know that was a thing. And so you get somebody to speak up and say, hey, this policy is, creating a hardship, and let me explain it to you. And having somebody with the courage to speak up and point out the things that I'm completely oblivious to, and it's not because I don't care, or it's not because I'm believe that success only looks like me. It's just I didn't even know this was a thing until somebody pointed it out. And it's like the women's initiative team that Alea talked about. That I didn't realize the issues associated with our policy around women's hair. And once somebody kind of points it out and says, hey, this is a thing and we need your help, I'm like, oh, well, of course, I'd be happy to help. I didn't, it never occurred to me that would be a thing. And so I think the three things that I would say that we can do to take maximum advantage of this moment that we're in is, number one, speak up. So if you have something to say, then you ought to be, as Mark said, you ought to be courageous enough to point it out, and don't assume that the people higher up in the chain of command understand, have the same understanding that you do. The second thing that I think we can do is listen. So it doesn't do Mark any good to speak up to me if I'm not listening to him. And so I have to, people like me have to be able to look past our own experiences and to understand that perhaps there are other things that we just haven't been exposed to, or maybe weren't aware of. And then the last thing that I would say is to, you know, it really kind of goes to the speaking up and listening. That requires an environment of trust and respect, right? So Myron Chivis is not going to tell me about this thing called pseudofolliculitis barbae if he doesn't trust me to hear him. And if I don't treat him with respect when he brings me something that maybe is different than my own experiences, that's going to be the only time he's going to do that. You know, if I shoot him in the face and tell him, you know, hey man, all I know is you got to be clean shaven, so shut up and get in line, because that's the standard. If I don't treat him with respect and listen to what he's got to say, he's never going to offer me that perspective again. And then I will be worse off as a leader because of that. And so we have to be courageous enough to speak up. We have to, as leaders, we have to be willing to listen to perspectives that are different than our own. And we have to establish an environment of trust and respect for all our airmen. So that's where I think success will lie for us.
Thank you, sir, and thanks to Alea, Myron, and Mark. I think I speak for everybody in attendance. Thank you for your honesty and for not only your willingness to share, but the clear demonstration to those who might be on the outside looking in that the Air Force is thinking about these issues in a very deep and thoughtful way. And we all know we have a long way to go as a society, but I think today's conversation at least gave all of us hope that major institutions definitely have the capability of changing. And so with that, thank you for sharing your voices and for joining us today. Emma.
Thank you so much, Jason. And thank you, General Slife, Myron, Alea, and Mark for participating in this really important discussion. Your candor, passion, and thoughtfulness are incredibly valuable as we consider how to affect change within the Air Force and the Department of Defense broadly. Hearing from each of you who fill different roles in the Air Force and each of whom are making progress on these issues has given me more hope that realities will shift. As usual, particular thanks to Bishop and Jason for framing the issues so thoughtfully and driving the conversation forward. To everyone in attendance, to ensure you get the email when the recording is released and to learn about future events in the series and our related Athena Leadership Project series on women's leadership in the military, go to cnas.org and click follow or follow at CNASDC on Twitter. Thanks so much to all of you for joining us today, and let's keep this conversation going.
Thank you, folks. Fantastic conversation. Thank you so much.